edge of the Moors Desert in northern China. The desert lies near the irrigated lands of the Hetao section of the Yellow River.
China is moving sand by the billion tons and planting trees by the billion stems. Entire deserts that once marched toward Beijing are now held in place by man-made forests, solar fields, and irrigation lines that run like veins across dunes. At the same time, lakes are collapsing, riverbeds are being mined bare, and new highways cut straight through land once considered lethal. This is the story of how a country tried to stop the desert from swallowing it and what it cost to do it. A country turning to sand. Before the glass towers and high-speed rail lines, northern China was a belt of grassland and scattered woodland. Goats and sheep grazed under poplar windbreaks. Rivers ran seasonally but predictably, and villages sat on soil that could still hold moisture. That balance is gone. Over the past 70 years, the north and northwest have watched usable land turn step by step into bare dust. Today, roughly 1/4 of the country's territory is classified as desert or severely degraded dry land. The line between green and yellow is not a natural frontier. It is a slow-moving disaster pushed forward by people. The forces behind that shift are simple to name and hard to reverse. Industry moved into dry provinces and pulled groundwater faster than rain could replace it. Farms expanded to feed growing cities and stripped topsoil that took centuries to build. Forests that once anchored dunes were cut for fuel or cleared for cropland. Herds grazed every sprout that tried to come back. With less cover, wind lifted the loose sand and carried it east. Dust began to travel far beyond the empty basins where it formed. Sandstorms that once stayed in Xinjiang and Inner Mongolia started to sweep across Gansu, Ningxia, and Hebei. On bad spring days, a yellow haze rolled straight into Beijing, scratching throats, stinging eyes, and grinding into windowsills and subway seats. The scale is hard to picture until you follow the numbers. Desertified land in China now measures in the millions of square kilometers, an area larger than many nations. In the late 20th century, the Gobi Desert alone was advancing by several thousand square miles per year. The Yellow River, which for centuries carried the legend of feeding the heart of the country, began to run so low that long stretches went dry for months. Grassland counties lost their grazing base. Villages abandoned fields that no longer held water. When a dry field finally lets go, it does not slowly fade. It becomes airborne and leaves. By the late 1970s, the crisis could no longer be ignored. Airborne dust was hitting Seoul and Tokyo. Commercial flights diverted to avoid sand clouds as thick as smoke. City officials in Beijing sometimes had to turn on street lamps at midday because the sun was muted to a pale disk. Leaders faced a basic question: either retreat from the north or hold the line. Retreat was not acceptable, which left only one option: stop the desert where it stood. That decision sent China down a path no other nation had attempted at continental scale. Instead of building walls of stone, the plan was to build a wall of life, wrap shifting dunes in roots, and force sand to sit still. It would take billions of seedlings, thousands of irrigation wells, and entire new careers for people who once herded goats. It would also take sand, and a lot of it. If the desert was already swallowing villages and sending sand into Beijing, how do you even begin to stop it? And can you really turn shifting dunes into something that holds still? The Great Green Wall. In 1978, Beijing authorized what is now called the Great Green Wall. On paper, it looked almost impossible. A belt of forest and shrubland would be planted across the north and northwest, stretching in patchwork zones from the edge of the Gobi towards the industrial heartland. The goal was blunt: slow the dunes, trap blowing sand, and give exhausted soil a chance to recover. It sounded like a myth. It became policy. The early years were closer to survival engineering than gardening. Crews tried to plant young trees directly in open sand and watched the wind bury them overnight. Summer heat climbed past 40 degrees Celsius. Winter dropped below -40. Rain might not fall for months. Normal saplings had no chance. Forestry teams and local farmers began to experiment. They dug funnel-shaped pits so dawn condensation would collect at the base of a seedling. They wrapped root balls in water-retaining fabric and buried slow-release irrigation bags below the surface so moisture would not evaporate. They chose species that could live where most trees cannot. Saxaul, desert willow, poplar lines bred for brutal dryness. Some of these trees drive roots 60 to 90 feet down to tap groundwater far below reach of grass. Over time, the method shifted from scattered groves to deliberate geometry. Workers planted in tight grids to break the wind and force dunes to stall. Straw checkerboards were hammered into sand to hold it still until roots could take over. Local families were paid to patrol, water, and replace dead stems before the dune could reopen. What began as a state order turned into generational labor. In Inner Mongolia and Ningxia, couples spent decades walking the same square kilometers with buckets, shovels, and rolls of straw. Some can now point to entire shelter belts that did not exist when they were young and say those are ours. By the 2000s, satellite images began to show something few experts had predicted. Patches that were once mobile dune fields had darkened. What had been bright tan in the 1980s showed up as muted brown and early green. According to government tallies, artificial forest and shrub cover now span an area larger than many countries. The expansion of the Gobi has slowed sharply. In some sectors, the desert is not advancing at all. It is retreating. This living barrier does more than block sand. Trees lock carbon in their trunks and in the soil around them. Surface temperatures drop in their shade. Moisture lingers a little longer in air that used to strip skin dry. Villages that once watched crops fail under abrasive wind now grow millet, sunflowers, and even fruit in places that were bare gravel 2 generations ago. A plan that once sounded like propaganda is now daily life for millions. Yet success brings tension. Trees in dry land drink water. Irrigation lines and wells must keep feeding them if rainfall cannot. That means the Great Green Wall is not a single build. It is a living machine that must be kept running year after year across almost 200,000 square miles. Planting forests to freeze a desert in place is one thing on paper, but what happens when the war against sand moves into the most hostile zone on Earth, where even standing still can kill you? Highways through the Sea of Death. Far to the west lies the Taklamakan, a desert locals call the Sea of Death. It covers more than 300,000 square kilometers, most of it shifting dune with almost no natural anchor. In the early 2000s, spring storms from the Taklamakan could swallow highways, choke airfields, and darken entire prefectures in Xinjiang. Cropland downwind was stripped to gravel. Oil fields and gas wells inside the basin were cut off for days. The state answer was familiar in ambition: do not go around the desert, cross it. The Taklamakan Desert Highway began as an industrial service road in the 1990s and grew into a full transport artery. Asphalt now runs straight across dunes that once behaved like water. On both shoulders, shelter belts line the route, row after row of drought-tolerant shrubs and hardy poplars planted in trenches. Under the sand, a web of drip irrigation pipes and shallow wells feeds those belts day and night. Crews work in rotation to clear drifts and repair torn lines before wind can reclaim the road. Stations sit at regular intervals with pumps, solar panels, storage tanks, and dorms so workers can live on site. The idea is plain: keep the routes alive and the road survives. The same logic extends to rail. The Luntai to Hotan line, sometimes called a steel lifeline, threads across land where no paved road existed before it. Nearly 90% of its length runs through sand-prone zones. Engineers elevated long stretches on causeways and built more than 1,000 culverts, so wind-pushed dunes could pass below rather than climb over the track. Windbreak strips flank the rails. Mesh mats pin loose slopes. 9 sand control centers monitor conditions and dispatch crews to shovel, spray, and anchor. Trains now carry oil, grain, building supplies, and people. What was once an isolated interior basin links directly to markets and ports. These crossings are not only feats of civil engineering, they are declarations. The message is that even the most hostile land inside the national border will not remain empty. Roads invite settlement, and settlement demands stability. Along the Taklamakan Highway, service posts that began as pump stations now sell fuel and basic goods. Some have grown into towns with schools and clinics. Tree belts, planted only to hold sand, now double as sources of leaves, wood, and animal fodder. Families harvest branches for fire-resistant timber and gather herbal material from shrubs that would never have grown there without irrigation. To keep a highway alive in a moving dune field, you need constant labor and constant water. Irrigation wells pull groundwater. Solar arrays line service yards so pumps and sensors can run without diesel. Officials present the route as a near-carbon-neutral desert highway, with photovoltaic stations replacing the fuel that used to run maintenance gear. Whether that claim stands up to a strict audit is debated. The intent is not. The Taklamakan is treated as territory to be held, farmed, traveled, and powered, not an empty gap on the map. Highways and rail lines now cross the Sea of Death, and oil and people move where only dunes moved before. But what new price did that access unlock beneath the surface? The cost of sand. There is an uncomfortable contradiction under all this greening. The same country that is planting forests to stop erosion is also pulling staggering volumes of sand out of its rivers and lakes to feed construction. Desert sand will not work for concrete. Its grains are too round and smooth, shaped by endless wind. Concrete needs sharp edges that lock together. Those grains come from riverbeds. China builds more housing, factories, ports, and highways than any other nation on Earth. That appetite swallows billions of tons of sand every year. When you pull too much sand from a river, the channel deepens. When you gouge out a lake bed, the shoreline drops. The most dramatic case sits in Jiangxi province at Lake Poyang, the country's largest freshwater lake. In the wet season, Poyang once spread across thousands of square kilometers and acted as a natural buffer for the Yangtze. It stored floodwater in summer and leaked it back downstream in winter. That rhythm protected farms and towns from violent swings. Then, commercial dredging ramped up. Hundreds of boats, some the size of small ships, began scooping sand off the lake floor and pumping it into barges. On peak days, an individual vessel can lift thousands of tons. Multiply that by a fleet and the lake bed drops fast. The change is visible from the air. Shoals that used to sit just below the surface are now trenches. Wetland shallows, where migratory birds once fed, have turned to cracked mud flats. Fisheries that supported villages for generations are a fraction of their old yield. Residents speak about empty nets and dry wells where water used to sit all year. With the floor deepened, the lake no longer spills outward during flood season the way it did before. Instead, storms push surges straight into the Yangtze. That means when the river runs high, it now runs higher and faster through cities downstream. A natural pressure valve has been carved open. Authorities know the danger. Restrictions on sand mining have been issued again and again. Patrols chase illegal dredgers. Licenses are tightened. Fines are raised. Enforcement works for a while, and then demand surges, and the boats return. The profit margin is simply too good. Sand is heavy, needed everywhere, and cheap to sell if you can carry it away in bulk. As long as urban growth keeps climbing, the draw to keep digging does not fade. This is the hidden cost of holding back the desert. New apartments in the east, new factories on the coast, and new highways in the interior all pull from the same resource pool. Every ton of concrete poured in a coastal city represents tons of sediment gone from a riverbed somewhere else. In the long run, the trade can reshape entire watersheds. A lake that once cooled a province and buffered a flood becomes a deep pit dotted with dredge scars. The forest belts may stop dust storms, but the appetite for sand can destabilize water systems that people depend on just as much as rain. As lakes drop, wetlands crack, and sand hunger keeps feeding the cities, can the same deserts China is fighting become the next source of power instead of the next source of damage? Turning the desert into power. To outsiders, the Northwest can look empty. To planners in Beijing, that emptiness is an opportunity. Where crops struggle and people are sparse, sunlight is relentless, and wind cuts across the flats with almost no obstacle. That makes desert land a testbed for utility-scale renewable power. Over the past decade, huge solar and wind complexes have risen on ground that once did nothing but drift. One site on the edge of the Gobi holds a tower taller than many city skyscrapers. Around it sit fields of mirrors tilted like metal flowers. During the day, those mirrors steer sunlight onto the top of the tower, where the beam heats a tank of molten salt. The salt stores that heat like a battery. Steam spun from that heat drives turbines and keeps producing electricity after sunset. Instead of panels that only work when the sun is up, this thermal plant can feed the grid through the night. Operators speak about hundreds of millions of kilowatt-hours each year, enough to power entire prefectures without burning coal. Elsewhere, photovoltaic fields stretch to the horizon. In Inner Mongolia and Gansu, ranks of blue-black panels sit on tilting mounts that track the sun through the day. Some arrays have been laid out in stylized shapes visible from orbit, partly for local pride and partly because an ordered layout makes maintenance easier. Together, these fields have already delivered billions of kilowatt-hours into the grid. Officials frame them as proof that land once known for dust storms can now export clean power. Renewable build-out is not only about electricity sales, it also acts as another form of stabilization. Panel frames cast shade that cools the ground and slows evaporation. Wind fences around panel rows break the gusts that once pushed dunes forward. In some pilot sites, drip irrigation under the panels grows hardy forage plants. The idea is to layer production, power on top, biomass below. Both together make it harder for sand to move. This approach carries a second benefit that is political. When you place a billion-dollar energy array in the middle of open desert, that land stops being treated as wasteland. It becomes critical infrastructure. Roads are paved to reach it. Fiber lines are buried. Security teams are stationed. That footprint locks the territory in place as firmly as any tree belt. It is a stake that says this region now feeds the national grid. Limits remain. Solar farms still need water for cleaning. Power lines must cross fragile steppe to deliver electricity to coastal megacities that consume most of it. Herders complain that panel fields eat grazing space that supported their families for generations. The country now faces a balance test. Can the driest land be turned into energy without creating a new wave of ecological strain? A green wall with cracks. 40 years after the first seedlings went into dry sand, China points to satellite proof of progress. Dunes that once advanced each season have stalled. Sandstorms that used to turn Beijing's sky orange now arrive less often. Officials call this victory over the desert. That claim is real, but it is only part of the story. The forest belts that anchor loose ground survive only with constant care. Many stretches of the Great Green Wall are fast-growing monocultures in straight rows. They look dense from orbit, but they are fragile. A pest, a fungus, or a run of drought years can wipe out kilometers at once. When belts die, the exposed soil can be even looser than before because native shrubs were cleared to make room. Crews now spend as much time patching failed belts as planting new ones. Keeping the wall alive has become a permanent job. Water is the next limit. Irrigation lines snake across dunes and vanish into shallow wells. Pumping those wells keeps roots wet, but it also lowers groundwater. In some counties, wells drilled for shelter belts now run deeper than wells drilled for people. The Taklamakan Highway faces the same pressure. Its shelter belts hold the asphalt in place only because pumps never rest. If funding drops or wells run dry, sand will reclaim the road in a single windy season. To manage that risk, planners are turning the frontier into a networked system. Solar-powered masts with soil probes and cameras feed live data into control rooms. Software watches wind speed, humidity, and canopy health. If gusts rise in a weak sector, operators can pulse water into the root zone before the storm hits, keeping the surface crust heavy. Drone teams map dead patches and send coordinates to ground crews. The idea is to treat the desert edge like critical infrastructure, measure everything, respond fast. This model is already being packaged for export. Engineers pitch desert control for regions from the Sahel to the American Southwest. The message is simple: plant belts. Feed them with smart drip lines powered by solar pumps. Add renewable farms for revenue and roads to move goods. But every gain brings strain. The wall slows dust and locks carbon, yet thirsty plantations demand constant water. The Taklamakan Highway links oil fields and towns. yet it must be defended day and night against drifting dunes. Solar towers in the Gobi send clean power east, yet panel washing can stress oases nearby. At the same time, lakes that once buffered floods are being lowered by sand mining, and herders are watching panel fields occupy land their animals used to roam. The national plan calls for a ring of green around the north by mid-century. If it holds, dust storms could fade. If it fails, the result could be thirsty plantations, sinking lakes, and deserts that keep moving anyway. The project is now about more than scenery. It is about who controls climate risk and where people will be able to live. China is trying to hold back a moving desert with trees, water lines, data towers, highways, and solar grids. It is one of the largest environmental engineering efforts ever attempted by any nation, and it is still underway. We will keep tracking how this experiment reshapes land, weather, and daily life across the north. If you want to follow every turn in this story, remember to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update.